Hey there, Food Junkies listeners. Before we dive in, we've got something really special for you, and it's time sensitive. How does a free live stream ticket to the International Food Addiction Comorbidities Conference sound? That's a 140 US dollar value, and we're giving away 20 of them. Here's the deal. For every $25 US donation you make, your name goes into the draw. $50, that's two entries. $100, that's four chances to win. The conference happens September 4th and 5th, 2025, live from London. But with this live stream ticket, you'll get front row access to 17 expert speakers, two groundbreaking panel discussions, and the latest research and recovery insights from global leaders in the field. But hurry, the draw is happening September 1st. This giveaway is hosted by Food Addiction Solutions and Sweet Sobriety. And here's the best part. Your donation doesn't just get you in the draw, it helps us fund the science, the community, and the advocacy that's changing lives. So check the show notes for the link. Don't forget to include your name and email so we can reach out to you if you win. Let's build a healthier future together. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others, and hopefully the message will spread.
What has addiction got to do with cancer? Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I am your co-host today, along with Molly Painshab. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Raphael Cuomo, author of Crave, The Hidden Biology of Addiction and Cancer. Dr. Cuomo is an American biomedical scientist and associate professor of the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine, where he leads research in the intersection of addiction, cancer prevention, and public health. He got his PhD in global health from San Diego, completed a master in public health from San Diego State University, and is a fellow of the Royal Society for Public Health. He has authored over 100 peer-reviewed publications and is internationally recognized for his grasp on how behavioral factors like addiction can reshape cancer risk and outcomes. Raphael's book, Crave, explores the biological connections between addiction and disease. His research goes beyond the traditional dopamine hijacking brain narratives that we at Food Junkies appreciate. Using extensive clinical data, he shows how addiction actually alters our biology to support chronic diseases such as cancer to develop. Welcome, Raphael.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here with you, especially because this audience really understands that addiction is not so much a moral failing as it is a biological condition that reshapes our health in profound ways. That's the heart of my book, Crave. Craving, repetition, and compulsive reward-seeking behaviors don't just affect mood or weight, but actually shape our biology in ways that promote chronic diseases, including cancer.
Can you tell us about how you got interested in the intersection between addiction and cancer?
Absolutely. I began seeing a pattern in my research. People struggling with addiction, whether to food, alcohol, cannabis, or opioids, weren't just facing mental health challenges, they were dying younger, surviving cancer less often, and showing immune patterns that looked radically different from individuals who did not suffer from addictions. And that pushed me to ask, what is addiction really doing to the body over time?
We've got the classical dopamine hypothesis of the drive to overeat and how food addiction develops. But you're saying a lot more about addiction. Can you develop that model a bit more for us?
Sure, yeah. So the classic model says that eating releases dopamine, which feels rewarding, so we repeat it. Okay? But the real driver of addiction isn't pleasure, it's anticipation. Over time, the brain starts releasing dopamine in response to food cues. The sight, the smell, or thought of food, not just the food itself, Meanwhile, the actual act of eating becomes less palatable, less pleasurable, I should say. That disconnect is what the traditional model misses. People with food addiction aren't chasing enjoyment, they're caught in a loop of needing more stimulation just to feel normal.
Yeah. So that's essentially the difference between wanting and liking.
Exactly, yes. So wanting is driven by dopamine, right? It's the motivational pull that makes you seek out a reward. Liking is the actual pleasure you get from consuming it. And this is actually often mediated by a different system, by the opioid system. In food addiction, wanting increases while liking decreases. That's why people say things like, I couldn't stop myself, or I wasn't even hungry when they seek out food. Their brain is anticipating relief or stimulation, not responding to actual hunger. Okay, it becomes compulsive because the system is out of balance and the wanting starts to take over.
People will even say, I didn't even like it, but I was still wanting it.
Exactly.
Okay, how does the chronic overstimulation, either from food or screens or stress, how does that lead to the loss of natural pleasure, just our ability to enjoy normal foods?
Yeah. So the brain isn't designed for constant stimulation. When reward pathways are triggered too often, whether by ultra processed food or other things like social media, stress, the system gets overloaded. And to protect itself, the brain reduces its responsiveness by pulling back dopamine receptor density. This isn't just about food anymore, it affects how you respond to everything. Activities that once felt fulfilling no longer register. The result is emotional flatness, disinterest, and a reliance on external stimulation to feel anything at all. So it's not just a craving loop, it's a narrowing of your capacity to feel genuine reward from any kind of external stimuli.
Which is what we would classically call anhedonia.
Exactly, yes.
You're talking about dopamine and dopamine receptor desensitization or a decrease in density, but you also talk about alterations in the opioid system, GABA system, glutamate system. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. So the opioid system governs pleasure and pain relief. And when it's dysregulated, people feel emotionally flat and seek comfort foods or substances. GABA controls inhibition. So when GABA signaling is low, anxiety increases, and that drives a lot of compulsion, compulsive behaviors. Glutamate is responsible for encoding memory and cue response learning. So it tells the brain what to expect and when to expect it. In addiction, these systems interact with each other to create a state where the person feels completely dysregulated. They feel uncomfortable and they're driven to seek relief through their crave by experiencing and trying to fill these cravings. So craving is just not about dopamine, certainly not. It's a shift in multiple neurotransmitter systems.
And you mentioned the endocannabinoid system, and I was interested in that because we have not been talking about the endocannabinoid system. That's a relatively new system that we're learning. And you mentioned that in relation to cancer. Is this an appropriate time to ask that?
We can talk about the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah.
So what it does, the endocannabinoid system, it regulates mood, appetite, inflammation, and immune function. So it has a lot of different functions throughout the body. In addiction, this as well becomes dysregulated. It's often overstimulated, and that can be through chronic THC use, which we classically associate with the endocannabinoid system. But we see similar effects from other kinds of substances as well, including ultra-processed foods. In cancer, that same system plays a role in tumor growth, and it plays a role in angiogenesis and immune evasion, so kinds of things that promote cancer and dysregulates the things in our body, the systems that are intended to prevent our cancers. So when a patient has both, say, a cannabis addiction or a food addiction or various different addictions, as well as cancer, the two conditions may amplify one another, which would lead to worse outcomes. And it's reflected in studies I've done, for example.
You talk about how addiction creates, you call them molecular scars, or changes the molecular terrain where chronic disease can thrive. So do you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely. So the first chapter of my book it's called Molecular Scars, and that's because addiction leaves molecular scars. And these are not just the substance use disorders that are diagnosed and very serious conditions, but these are also these low-grade everyday addictions that we repeat throughout the course of our lives, which predisposes for the development of chronic diseases like cancer. So addiction does start in the brain, but it does not stay there. Repeated dopamine surges trigger stress responses, they raise cortisol, they promote chronic low-grade inflammation. And that inflammation affects white blood cells, hormone balance, and cellular repair systems. Over time, repeated over and over, these effects damage the immune system's ability to detect abnormal cells and remove them, and it increases the likelihood that mutations will go unchecked. That's where you see the increase in cancer risk. So addiction doesn't just leave behavioral scars, it leaves molecular ones as well.
Explain what you mean by molecular.
Yeah, certainly. We have these everyday addictions to things like ultra-processed foods. And by indulging those cravings over and over, we cause things like chronic low-grade inflammation, which prevents our immune system's ability to clear damaged cells. In addition, things like ultra-processed food have this additional effect of causing direct DNA damage through oxidative stress. So not only are we causing mutations in our cells, we're preventing our body's ability to clear those cells. And so we get the development of cancer, as well as the growth of cancers. And so these are molecular scars in the sense that they are affecting the molecules in our body, the immune system molecules, as well as the intracellular molecules in our cells, or genetics, and other kinds of molecules within and around our cells, and also leave physical scars in the form of lesions and the development of tumors.
You're talking about like specific inflammatory cytokines and growth factors that are out of the norm, and that this is affecting the terrain.
Absolutely. So addictive behaviors elevate cytokines like interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and C-reactive protein, so IL-6, TNF-alpha, and CRP. And these molecules are indicators, and they promote chronic inflammation. They reduce immune surveillance and increase oxidative stress. Chronic exposure to these will alter insulin signaling and increase leptin resistance, which further destabilizes immune function and also will increase appetite, as we can appreciate with leptin's functions. This molecular terrain, as I call it in the book, becomes one where the body is in constant low-grade alert. It's too inflamed to function properly, but too exhausted to mount a real defense. And that will lead to chronic diseases like cancer.
And cancer specifically, because our immune system normally can regulate the stray cancer cell, but in this case it can't because it's not functioning properly.
That's right. So our immune systems are developed through things like cytotoxic T cells, as well as natural killer cells. There are various different immune functions in the body that are designed to detect and remove cancer cells. And if that's not functioning properly because we are doing things like giving into ultra-processed food addictions and have other kinds of low-grade addictions that we repeat every single day, causing this chronic inflammation, then we prevent ourselves from eliminating the development of cancer cells. Mutations are going to happen. We can prevent a lot of them through healthy behaviors, but mutations are going to happen. And we have this incredible ability of the immune system to remove those cells that are damaged, and we're preventing our own ability to do that a lot of the times because of these chronic everyday addictions.
So that could be addictions like ultra-processed food addiction, but it could also just be stress, like stress itself can cause this, like a person who has PTSD.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are not designed to have the kind of chronic stimulation that we are experiencing in our society today. Whether it's ultra-processed food, social media, or stress from work and overwork, our system gets overloaded. To protect itself, the brain reduces its responsiveness by pulling back dopamine receptor density, as I said before. So we need to recognize this in the behaviors that we engage with and on an everyday basis. And we need to try to recognize the low-grade addictions and try to intervene upon them. Try to establish a natural rhythm that allows for restorativeness, that allows for repair. And absolutely, that's something that I hope to achieve in the book, to get people to understand the kinds of stressors that they're facing on an everyday basis and to recognize the need for trying to pull away from those addictive behaviors that are causing that stress.
Now, you mentioned in the book the concept of allostatic load from chronic addiction, which might lead to measurable biomarkers. Is there a possibility that we could find a test of some sort to determine a person's risk based on all of these challenges to the immune system?
Yes. So allostatic load will manifest in things like elevated C-reactive protein, dysregulated cortisol, shortened telomeres, and mitochondrial function. So these are all measurable changes of high allostatic load, which, just to define for the audience, refers to wear and tear, the cumulative wear and tear from chronic physiological stress. So as I said, that these lead to physiological change, molecular changes in the body, which are all measurable. Now, a test is something that we'll need to invest in a lot of research in order to develop that. We are not quite at a level at this point where we have necessarily a good kind of test for overall allostatic load, in my view. But it is certainly feasible where we could develop something like that would not just predict cancer risk, but poor outcomes for patients that have cancer as well. So higher allostatic load means lower resilience, worse treatment tolerance, and greater risk of recurrence. So it will be important, I think, to try to get some sort of quantifiable measure of allostatic load developed.
By inference, could we use serum insulin or cortisol level? Those are signs of the body's disrepair.
Absolutely. I think that those are certainly some kinds of tests that would be correlated with a high allostatic load. We have to be careful with certain things like the timing of that and make sure that what we're actually measuring is is going to be reflective of the overall cumulative damage over time and not something that has occurred, say, recently, so a recent stressor. But you're absolutely right. There are certain things that which we are able to measure right now, which would be correlated with the allostatic load, which we have encountered, and therefore could give us a sense of disease risk in the long term, as well as outcome risk for patients that have these diseases.
What about adverse childhood experiences lead to early death and addiction and whatnot? Would you go so far as to say that could change the molecular terrain and predispose a person to cancer? Could we actually say that is a high risk?
Yes. So I would say that it is a child that has experienced adverse childhood experiences and has this kind of a high degree of stressor as a child is going to be more likely to turn as a child to certain kinds of behaviors. And that's not necessarily the fault of the child. Sometimes it is the parent that says, okay, hey, you don't feel good because you had this kind of experience. Here's a screen to make you feel better. Here is some candy to make you feel better. And that pattern gets recognized both biologically and psychologically. And so those children learn as adults to seek out those same kinds of patterns as in different ways. Right. So that's food addiction is certainly within that, but also things like validation from others through overwork or screens or social media likes or whatever it is. We seek these kinds of external remediations to the stresses that we face instead of dealing with those stressors directly. And those can begin in childhood. And that's addiction. But you can, of course, have dysregulated kinds of biological patterns that start out in childhood that may lead to chronic diseases later on.
I was thinking of not even addiction, but just the constant exposure to internal stressors, because a person with adverse childhood experiences might see the universe as a more frightening place, a more hostile place. That mentality is inherently stressful. So just that in and of itself, without the consequences of addiction, could predispose the person to cancer.
Absolutely. So increased levels of cortisol among children are going to have the same kind of biological ramifications as they do among adults. The thing is with adults, we have our immune systems that are not necessarily as resilient as children have. So we are a little bit more sensitive as we grow older, but still as children, we still do leave these kinds of molecular scars. We do still have consequences of that, and the psychological consequences of that are those that can continue over time. You develop this kind of high stress mindset as a child because you have these kinds of stressful exposures. You continue to look at the world in that same manner, and as an adult, if you are in that same pattern of behavior and pattern of thinking, you're going to be much less likely to activate the restorative mechanisms that are ingrained in our bodies that will allow us to repair from the damage that can lead to cancers.
This term molecular scar, is this your term that you've designated to capture this phenomena?
Yes. I can't say for certain whether anyone's ever used that term before, but I did create it myself in writing the book as, of course, an indicator of the kind of biological consequences that accumulate over time as a result of our everyday unhealthy addictions.
It does capture nicely the concept. In vitro, mom could, her molecular scar will influence the fetus.
There is some evidence to suggest that the kind of stressors that women who are carrying children face may have biological consequences on the baby. Now, the development of cancer is something that there's not enough research on to really say with any certainty that would occur, but it is plausible that there are going to be some adverse biological consequences of high stress for mothers who are carrying children, biological consequences on the baby.
Looking at children, we see not only ultra-processed food, but digital engagement to extremes that have never before been seen. So what's your commentary on digital engagement?
I think one of the biggest issues with that is that children are given screens to distract from dealing with the issues that are in a healthier manner. So I have children. I have two kids of my own, and they're both pretty young. They're 5 and 3. And I get it. I get the temptation to, when they're tantruming and when they're upset and crying, I get the temptation to give them a tablet with a show on it or a game. But sometimes there's a degree of moderation where I think that's perfectly reasonable. But I think that there are many situations where it becomes overblown. The appropriate manner is to talk through issues with your child, to work through the problems, because that's the healthy way of dealing with your problems, not just to turn to any of these behaviors, whether it's ultra-processed food or screens or other kinds of maladaptive behaviors. The healthy way to approach them is to take a breath and to think about what's bothering you and how to resolve it and to work toward that, to calm yourself down and to deal with things in a healthy manner. I do believe that when we give our children screens to resolve every little issue, we are not setting them up for success in life. And this is not just with regard to cancer, but certainly has ramifications that will lead to the development of chronic diseases if they are unable to deal with their issues in a healthy manner as adults.
Do you think it is possible to, as a father, Molly, you're a mom, do you think it's possible to actually use digital engagement in a constructive manner?
I believe it operates on a spectrum. Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's a complicated question. It sounds like your children are much younger than mine. Mine are 12 and 9. So they are well immersed in school, and in our school district and in many school districts across the US, children are issued Chromebooks, and they're no longer issued the standard, like we don't necessarily have like pen and notebooks on the like supply list every year is what I guess what I'm trying to say, because children are on everything is done via Google Doc. All of these different ways that teachers are now engaging with their students is very electronic focused. So I don't even know how we can answer that question when the public school system is engaging in these methods.
Yeah. So there are a couple things with screens. So one thing is how children are given screens with the purpose of distraction. So I think that if you're writing an essay or using a spreadsheet, that's less of an issue. I think the issue is when you're given some app that's fun as a means of distracting from resolving deeper issues or things that are really could be problematic for the child to go through. Another thing is the screens at night. So having any screen exposure at night, regardless of what they're doing on the screen, can prevent them from getting high quality sleep. And sleep is something that is the most inexpensive kind of medicine you can get. It is getting high quality sleep is incredibly important. And so I would definitely not want my kids to be on screens very late into the night, especially not for hours and hours, regardless of what they're doing. I understand how challenging that can be, but it is something that I think we should try to move away from because high quality sleep is important.
We could say the same thing about ultra processed food as well, that or any eating it as well. We shouldn't eat late at night because it'll affect sleep. So I guess that's any of these kind of behaviors. They're just too stimulating.
Yes, indeed. And a theme throughout the book is that constant overstimulation, how we constantly turn to things to either distract ourselves or to resolve these cravings. We want a screen, we want to scroll through social media, we want ultra-processed foods, we want one thing or another. And of course, there are the actual drugs, nicotine and caffeine, and I have nothing against a cup of coffee, but we turn to these things because we want the constant stimulation and we never give our bodies a break. And that's a problem. We need restorative rhythms in our life to allow our biological systems to repair and to prevent us from getting chronic diseases, including cancer.
And part of that restorative rhythm is no hyperstimulation. So it means ultimately what that person might experience is they'll be feeling bored.
Yeah. Exactly. And sometimes that's okay. It's okay to be a little bored. Take a breath, to sit there for a little while, to think, meditate. I think that's a fantastic approach. Or even sleep. Sometimes instead of staying up with something that seems interesting, maybe just go to sleep. A lot of us are sleep deprived. We could use a nap. So I think it's absolutely fine to not be interested and entertained 100% of the time that you're around.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you make another interesting point in the book where you talk about cravings as being part of a person's identity. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, so craving isn't just a behavior. It becomes part of how people define themselves. Yeah. So I'm someone who needs chocolate to relax, or I can't fall asleep without a snack. Yeah, these narratives are protective at first, but over time, they lock people into cycles of compensation rather than healing. So emotional awareness is key to breaking this. You have to pause and ask, what am I really feeling before I reach for this? Sometimes it's stress, loneliness, boredom, and not actually hunger. And recognizing that makes space for us to change, to grow.
Hey, Food Junkies listeners. We're just going to take a quick break here to share with you something our team thinks could help benefit your recovery with food, body, or self. Thank you again for listening.
Hey there, Food Junkies listeners. Have you grabbed your ticket yet for the International Food Addiction and Comorbidities Conference 2025? It's happening September 4th and 5th in London, England at the iconic Royal College of General Practitioners. This is the global gathering for professionals passionate about tackling food addiction and its related conditions like type 2 diabetes, mental health disorders, cardiovascular disease, and more. Come learn from world-renowned experts like Dr. Georgia E., Dr. Nicola Vina, Dr. Nasha Winters, Dr. Erica Lafata, Dr. David Wiss, Dr. Kim Dennis, Professor Adrian Sotomoda, Karen Thompson, Dr. Ignacio Caranta, and Dr. Tro Kalasian, plus insights from UNICEF's Mauro Brero on transforming food environments for kids. Earn up to 13 continuing professional development hours, enjoy a nourishing midday meal all included in your ticket, and connect with clinicians, researchers, and changemakers from around the world. Early bird tickets, 1-day, 2-day, and live stream tickets are on sale now, but only for a limited time. Head to the show notes and secure your spot at IFAC 2025. Let's move this conversation and this movement forward.
Now back to the show. If you have enjoyed this episode, please let us know. We love to hear from you. Kindly leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to our podcast on. We love getting feedback from our listeners.
You talk about food insecurity also, that even when food scarcity is resolved, the person has food, their metabolism may still be altered.
Yeah, so scarcity changes how the brain and the body relate to food. People who have experienced food insecurity, who have experienced scarcity, they tend to eat more rapidly. They tend to store more visceral fat. They have higher levels of stress hormones like cortisol, even after their environment does stabilize. So the body learns to expect famine and overcompensate when when it does become available. So that's why food addiction often lingers long after hunger has ended. It's a metabolic memory of scarcity.
Why is that happening? That's a very interesting point, because we see that in the context of a person wants to fast, and then they end up having fasting and binging cycles, fast, binge, and they weren't like that before. Is there actually a biological mechanism to this?
Yes, so the body is intended to live in certain rhythms, and that is okay. And historically, we have, as back in caveman times, have gone through periods where we have gone through fasting. And as a result of that, we would have needed to store additional fat for times when food was scarce and we needed that additional fat on our bodies to burn. But nowadays, we don't really live in those conditions. Food is abundant, food is everywhere. So it's a natural mechanism that the body has to overcompensate after times of scarcity. That's a natural mechanism, but it doesn't serve us very well today because we go through these periods of fasting and binging due to natural reasons, but we don't have an actual environment without any food. So you can just binge and then keep on binging and binging. And not to mention that again, when you binge, you're intended to overcompensate on purpose to store additional fat, and that doesn't serve us very well.
Happening in that food insecure environment.
Yeah. So the body is thinking that's what's going on
Yes.
when that's really not what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hormonal, I would say. Your hormones are caught off balance when you go through a period of fasting and starvation. So again, our bodies are designed to be okay with mechanisms of fasting. But when we go through a long period of fasting, we are naturally hungry and we eat and we overcompensate for that. So I have nothing against the practice of things like every other day fasting or 18-hour fasting. Our bodies are fine with going through that process. But unless you're being cognizant of eating normally afterward, you're going to fall into a routine of binge eating because your hormones are just not in the right kind of balance where you will naturally eat a normal meal. You are going to overeat unless you are cognizant of what's going on.
I read somewhere that a person, when they're fasting for a prolonged period of time, their body will intentionally become insulin resistant because the brain needs that glucose. It's as if the body wants there to be extra glucose for the brain. There is a metabolic shift almost as a positive because it doesn't know that fast will end. Would that concur with what you're saying as well?
Absolutely, yes. So all these mechanisms, including the hormonal mechanisms, the metabolic mechanisms we've been talking about, are all in sync with one another. And so when the body does signal to the brain signals to, so when the fat stores and glycogen depletion signals to the brain that it should be hungrier and should consume more, that is in sync with the body's metabolic mechanisms adapting such that you have increased glucose throughout the body, because the body is seeking to more readily use food as a result of it not having had food for a while.
You're saying that the body seems to have a memory of this even when food becomes available again.
Yes, so we have to be careful when we're fasting because, again, historically, as we developed in caveman times, when we did find food after not having food for a period of time, we would still only have a limited amount of food. And even if we did overeat after we had found food, we probably wouldn't continue to have the same kind of food availability for an extremely long period of time. Certainly not to the extent that we have food today, especially not the types of incredibly dense foods we are constantly surrounded with today. And so we should be cognizant when going through fasting that when we stop fasting, we should not just eat freely. We need to be careful to readapt afterward.
Yeah, that feeding period of time has to be very carefully monitored. So given the molecular scar or the terrain that changes, is this something that oncology should be aware of and could make use of in their discussion about prevention?
Yes, absolutely. So addiction affects treatment adherence. That's been documented. It affects immune function, so we've been discussing, affects things like wound healing and tumor biology, certainly. But it is rarely addressed in oncology today. So we screen for smoking, but not for food addiction or cannabis use or various other kinds of addictions that affect us on a day-to-day basis, certainly not things like screen addiction or social media addiction, but they can be biologically relevant. Now, I've been talking about this in the book, much of it in the context of the development of cancer, and certainly it does cause this molecular terrain that will lead to the development of cancer, but can be very detrimental toward patients that already have cancer. And of course, the objective there is to survive the cancer. And if you engage in the constant eating of ultra-processed foods and things like cannabis use, certainly nicotine, if you're smoking it, and also you're encountered with constant stress and not letting your body repair, and go through these natural restorative mechanisms, then you could face certainly worse outcomes. So I very much am in favor of the integration of substance use disorder screening, and I've written about this in position papers that have been published. But in addition to that, I would suggest that there be some additional kind of mental health perspective for patients that are dealing with cancer that not only integrates the typical kinds of questions we would ask that are relevant to mental health, but also what kinds of behaviors you're turning to in order to cope with the stressors you're dealing with in your life.
As a family doctor, we would ask about diabetes in the context of wound healing will be slowed down. It never occurred to me that a family doctor should also ask about addiction, not just because of adherence to treatment, but wound healing will be slowed down because it's the same dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, so we as a medical community, I would say that we do need to give space to the body to do the kinds of things that it is designed to do in order to help the body stay healthy. So by not trying to probe for the kinds of behaviors that people go through that are the consequence of this modern society that we live in, the overstimulation that we get and the kinds of things we turn to in order to stay excited and interested and to turn away from the kinds of things that are giving us stress, by not probing for the kinds of things that people turn to in order to deal with our modern stressors, we may be predisposing them to illness and also preventing them from healing in the optimal manner.
Yeah, you say the most dangerous aspect of addiction may not be what it feels like in the moment, but what it normalizes. So can you elaborate on this idea, especially in the context of food and cancer?
Certainly. So addiction warps your baseline. What used to be occasional becomes daily. What used to be enough becomes not enough anymore. Over time, you develop a new normal. Whether it's eating ultra-processed foods or vaping or constant phone use, this starts to feel more routine. It doesn't resolve any issues, doesn't feel good anymore. It just becomes what you need to feel normal. Biologically, it can be harmful. And abnormal inputs become the normal. We stop noticing that damage. And that's what makes it dangerous. The silence, the invisibility, not just the spike in the behavior, right? That it's something we need every single day now to function.
What would be the first thing that you would suggest for somebody? It's such a big question because people overeat, they overuse their phone, they vape. So what would you suggest would be first steps for somebody?
Certainly. The first step I would say is to read the book, right? So I would encourage people to read the book and to recognize that there are these kinds of behaviors that people interface with, that people do as a result of these everyday cravings, everyday addictions, and to try to look out for those cravings in your own life, right? What is it you're turning to when you're feeling stressed, right? What is it that you're compulsively seeking every single day for excitement or for stimulation? Then, once you recognize those those everyday cravings, everyday addictions, try to remove your triggers to them. Maybe clean out your kitchen, turn off notifications on your phone, or reduce the apps that are causing those notifications. Create a bedtime ritual, right? So you're not constantly allow yourself to, for hours, be overstimulated before bed. That's the first thing I would do, try to remove your triggers. And the second thing, I would reintroduce rhythm in your life. Eat at regular times. Get some morning sunlight, move around, try to take some time to rest and to repair, to be able to have some more restorative rhythm in your life. And I would also, third thing, is to regulate your emotions. Journaling, therapy, breath work, whatever helps you pause and respond rather than always being reactive, always seeking something to make you feel better. So that's something important.
Because not just the consequences of the addiction itself, like whether it's smoking or using food, it's also that it's destroying these rhythms which keep us steady, which keep us healthy.
Absolutely. And in the book, I argue for a new kind of prevention. We've been thinking about prevention for cancer very much as directly caused by behaviors, right? Which is perfectly consistent with the literature, and that's fine. Bad behaviors are causative for cancer, but I've been arguing for a new prevention that thinks upstream from that, right? Not just the behaviors resulting in the cancer, but the mindset, the psychological basis for why we engage with those behaviors in the first place. Because we know, I think, to do things like exercise, to avoid ultra-processed foods. I think a lot of people appreciate that. and then they try it and then they're unable to do it. And I think part of the reason for that is because we don't recognize how powerful these addictions, these everyday addictions are. So we need to think upstream in prevention to the mindset that people face, to the kinds of reasons that they're turning to these addictions on an everyday basis. And from there, we can start to really resolve the behavioral questions and have more healthy behavioral patterns. And from there, we will prevent disease.
Then to help people tolerate, like we mentioned, help people tolerate boredom, help people tolerate meditation, because a lot of people say they can't meditate, they're too stimulated to medicate. It's not just about those activities, it's the fact that it's bringing us to our natural rhythm, which we have lost.
Yeah, so we need to recognize that we're in a society that is not conducive to the natural rhythms of repair and resilience and that we developed as humans, to face. We need to recognize that we are in an unnatural environment, and we need to find a healthier way to deal with that, to adapt to the environment we're currently in by stopping and recognizing the kinds of things that we're turning to, and to try to pull back from that, from engaging in that on an everyday basis, because that's going to lead to chronic diseases.
Do you have any hope that will happen, that we will collectively figure that out somehow, or not figure it out, actually do it?
Well, I think that as we continue to do more research on issues like these, I think it will become clearer and clearer, and there will be even more scientific consensus around this. There's already a bunch of science, as from the book, that underpins all the things that I have been saying, but I think that even as more science comes out, there will be even more evidence at a certain point, and it will become so clear from the scientific literature that it hopefully becomes recognized more and more in the public, that it's not just engaging in behaviors that are going to prevent you from getting disease, but it's recognizing that you're addicted to bad behaviors and you are requiring yourself to face that every day in order to feel normal, in order to feel okay. And by the first thing you have to do is to change your mindset, and in order to engage with the healthy behaviors. So I do have a hope that we'll at least come to a recognition that these are the issues, and that as a result of that, people will start engaging with the kinds of, or disengaging with the overstimulation, and therefore engaging with the resilience and developing a healthier rhythm in life that will allow them ultimately to break free from poor behaviors and to start adapting positive behaviors, leading to decreased rates of disease and decreased mortality from some of these terrible diseases.
As a closing question, how do you hope the book will impact the reader? I think that's essentially what you're hoping for, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So I wrote this book because I wanted to help people who are struggling with many of these behaviors to live healthier lives and to not suffer the consequence of cancer or various other chronic diseases associated with this issue. And so what I hope that this book does is that it will allow people to recognize that they are not weak-willed, they are not broken, they are individuals that are living in a society that is challenging and has certain challenges, and they are turning to things that society has said is absolutely normal for you to turn to. And those kinds of messages, the kind of environment that we're in, have driven people to normalize things that shouldn't be normalized. People are putting themselves in this overstimulated state every single day. They're turning to things they shouldn't be turning to. They are suffering from everyday addictions. And so what I hope the book does is it allows people to recognize that this is what people are doing. They are turning to this, and they have indeed this kind of low-grade addiction that they're suffering from, and all the biological consequences that are going to lead to chronic disease. But it starts out with recognizing that you first are having these issues in the first place, and then you can start pulling away, breaking free, and developing more self-control.
And this secondary underlying state that we've forgotten has existed, which is our natural rhythm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you think anybody's listening from the addiction field, the oncology field? How can we make them listen to this?
I think that some are. So I've had good conversations with clinicians who are eager to connect dots like these, especially in survivorship programs. But I think that we need to come to a recognition that I think we're already at a point where people recognize that behaviors are going to be very impactful when it comes to both the treatment of patients as well as the prevention of disease. I think a recent study came out a couple of weeks ago showing an incredible effect of physical activity for patients that have cancer. And it was as much as or greater than the beneficial effect in terms of being able to survive cancer than some of the leading therapies that we have available for patients with cancer. So that was a landmark study that came out recently.
And that was in the oncology literature.
Exactly, yes. And yeah, that was a great study. And one thing that it reflects is that there are these behaviors that we engage in can be incredibly powerful. We turn to drugs, and that's perfectly fine, and people should take their medication. The medication adherence is important, but behaviors can be incredibly powerful for patients with these conditions as well as for the prevention of conditions. But we need to think upstream from behaviors. Just saying, go do this is not going to work. We need to find a way to convince patients to do these things. And by that, I don't mean being more convincing as a clinician. We need to recognize that there are legitimate stressors that patients face. What are those stressors? What are you turning to resolve your stressors? It's a little bit deeper than just trying to motivate at the point of patient consultation, right? We have to dig a little deeper and try to get people to break free from the overstimulatory and maladaptive behaviors they've been engaging with that will lead to cancer as well as to worse outcomes for patients that have cancer.
Okay, good. What is next for you?
So I'm certainly going to continue to conduct research, right? I am a scientist, and I have various students I'm working with to tackle a whole bunch of different questions in cancer. A lot of my research deals with various different behaviors, but not just in addiction, but also in things like nutrition and physical activity and other kinds of behaviors. I will continue to look at substance use disorders and the clinical data, as well as for patients that, both for patients with cancer and patients that don't have cancer, and see the influence of this on the development of those diseases. I hope to interface with policymakers at some point to more closely than I already have, to help to think about this on a social context, right? To allow for the space that people need in order to start breaking free from these everyday behaviors. As I've said, many of these behaviors are well established, their association with the development of cancer and how unhealthy they can be for patients that have cancer. We don't necessarily have an environment in many places set up, whether it's a workplace environment or a policy environment or any of these other kinds of systems that we have. They're not necessarily set up so that people can easily break free from the maladaptive addictions that they have and start engaging with the healthy behaviors. And so I hope to engage with policymakers in such a manner that we can set up systems and policies and programs that would enable patients and people that don't have disease as well from breaking free from these very difficult habits to break free from.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a signature question that we love to ask every one of our guests before they go. So if you could tell a younger version of yourself something about food addiction or phone addiction, whatever it might be, and cancer, what would it be?
I would say this: the things you do every day, even if they feel small, are reshaping your biology. So choose what you do carefully. Your cravings, these things you turn to, they're not who you are. They're not your character. They're just signals. Listen to your signals and then start writing the story of your life the way you want to write it. That's what I would say.
All right. That's a great way to end our talk. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a fun talk.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group, I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.